There we go. If anyone has any trouble hearing me, just raise a hand in the space chat or whatever, or message me. If anyone wants to add a comment or has a question or just wants to join in, just request the mic. I'm pretty liberal with giving the microphone out to people. All I ask is that whatever you say, it in some way relates to the fragments that we're currently reading. But yeah, questions or even just affirmative comments from yourself. As I said in the first part where we read the proem, what I'm really doing here is I'm reading obviously the fragments of Parmenides' work on nature, but I'm also reading them in the sense of I have my own particular philosophical project or my own thoughts about the world, and I view Parmenides as someone who's particularly inspiring and informative and helps me, reach my own conclusions. And so there are parts of this text that I interpret a certain way and that I think are particularly informative or interesting or can be viewed a certain way. So don't take my reading or my comments of this as sort of the one true meaning of Parmenides or the goddess's revelation. Obviously, that's not what I'm doing. I don't know the internal mind of Parmenides or the goddess. It's just my interpretation. But I do try to comment and throw in the opinions of other people as well, so you get sort of a broader view. And we did that in the first part as well. As you can see in the screen up top, we have 5 fragments for today. I also threw another one in there. We read the proem, which survives as one long fragment. Well, it's quoted in 2 places, but essentially is one long fragment, which is nice. But the way of truth does not survive that way. So after the proem, we do the way of truth, and then we do the way of seeming. But the way of truth and the way of seeming do not survive as one long form fragment or quote. So we're going to run into a situation where, like I said, we're going to have to look at the context of the different fragments, and just keep in mind that it's not set in stone the order that these fragments have to go in. And if you do get a copy of this book, sometimes you'll see that different sources for the fragments, because some of these fragments come from multiple sources, they might have slightly different spelling on words or things. So it's not always clear either what the exact intended word was meant to be. So just be a little careful in also taking the first English translation that gets presented. And also in just assuming that the order of the fragments in this book, that's the only order they can be in. I don't want to give that impression either. But this book, of course, has them in a particular order. It makes sense. And the professors, I'm sure, have their own little dispute about the order, but I think there's nothing too controversial. But here, let's read the last section of the proem. So what happened in the proem? Let me just go back. We read that the youth is essentially put on a chariot with horses, led by maidens. He's taken up to where day and night meet each other. Justice opens the gate wide for them, and the maidens lead him through the door. And there's a goddess. And what does the goddess say? She says, she takes his hand, receives him kindly, is nice to him, and talks to him. And she says, "Welcome, for it is no ill fortune that sent you forth to travel this route, for it lies far indeed from the beaten track of men, but right and justice. And it is right that you should learn all things, both the steadfast heart of persuasive truth, and the beliefs of mortals, in which there is no true trust. But nevertheless you shall learn these things as well, how the things which seem had to have genuine existence, permeating all things completely." So that's where we're at. The goddess has said, welcome here, I'm going to tell you about truth, and I'm also going to tell you about the beliefs of mortals, which you can't trust them, but they do have genuine existence, because genuine existence permeates all things completely. I gave a couple of interpretations of the proem last week when we read it. I know we have a lot of Platonists and people who like Plato here, and a lot of people as well just generally like the pre-Socratics, and also theories about sense perception and how it gets interpreted. And Sextus Empiricus, when he quotes this, so the proem is from Sextus and also from Simplicius, but Sextus actually gives his interpretation of the proem. And so when I was going in the fragment context for today, I went back to the context for the proem. Even though I didn't think we needed it, I just went back and looked at it, and I was like, oh, Sextus has an interesting interpretation for what the proem could mean. That's different from the one that from the couple or few that I gave last week. So here's what Sextus says. And it's just helpful because, again, we finished with the proems. This is sort of summing it up. After quoting the proem and a couple of sections from The Way on Truth, he says, "For in these verses, Parmenides means that the mares which carry him along are the irrational impulses and appetites of the soul, and that the much-speaking route of the goddess they travel is that of inquiry, according to philosophical reason. This reason, like a divine guide, points the way to the knowledge of all things, and the maidens that lead him on are the senses. Of these he alludes to auditory faculties in a riddling manner by saying, 'It was urged on by two rounded wheels,' that is, with the circles of the ears, by means of which they receive sound. And visual faculties he calls maidens, daughters of the sun, leaving the house of night and hastening into the light, because it is impossible to make use of them without light. And the approach to much avenging justice, who also holds the keys of requital or acquittal, is to intelligence, which holds a reliable apprehension of things. And she, after welcoming him, promises to teach him two things, both the steadfast heart of persuasive truth, which is the immovable foundation of knowledge, and secondly, the beliefs of mortals in which there is no true credence, that is to say, everything which lies in the realm of belief, because all such things are uncertain." So that's, I'm not going to say parts of it are ridiculous. It's different from how we viewed or how I presented certain things. It's interesting that the maidens are getting interpreted as the sensory faculties. Like, it was urged on by two rounded wheels, because wheels are circular and ears are circular, and that's how they receive sound. Interesting. I would almost say, why doesn't he indicate that the two rounded wheels are making sounds like a whistle, like we pointed out, or screeching of the pipes? Because that is also to do with sound, so I guess that would help his case, right? Although I mentioned I thought it was more like symbolizing a religious procession to a mystery, or a revelation which they'll receive. And then for the visual faculties, he's saying that the maidens also represent the visual faculties because they're hastening towards the light, and you can't use your visual faculties without the light. Obviously, again, I'm not Sextus Empiricus, but I also wonder why he doesn't point out the fact that the maidens push back their veils. So we mentioned, again in reading the text, that the maidens push back their veils when they're carrying Parmenides forth. And so if we're going to talk about the visual faculties, yes, they're the daughters of the sun. I guess you need light to see stuff. And they're leaving the house at night towards the light, I guess. If that's how the text is being interpreted, again, they could be moving in a different direction, but why not also point out that they push away their veils? Because presumably you can't see if you have your veils over your eyes. Although I haven't been wearing veils, to be honest. So yeah, I kind of get what he's saying. It's kind of interesting, and Sextus Empiricus he's a Pyrrhonian or a skeptic, and so maybe he's all about the sensory perceptions. So it's interesting how he did that, and I'm guessing that the Platonists here are going to be all about the mares which carry him along are the irrational impulses and appetites of the soul. Is it Phaedra or Phaedrus where he sits down with Lysias, and then he gets that poem about the horses and the carriage and how it's a soul and whatnot. Maybe
It's Phaedrus.
Phaedrus. Thank you, Rogerio. Oh, you got your hand up. I wasn't looking at the screen. Sorry. What do you have anything to add?
When you were mentioning the pulling away of the veil of the maiden, which represent the senses, I'm not sure if this is the case, but it kind of seems like it is attempting to perceive perception, basically, or attempting to sense the sensory faculties. So kind of taking a step back, and instead of just being passive consumers of what the senses are giving us, it is also to examine what the senses are doing actually.
Yeah, that's I think that goes further than Sextus Empiricus, because Sextus Empiricus is ultimately going to put the intelligence in justice. So he says, and the approach to much avenging justice, who also holds the keys of requital or acquital, is to intelligence, which holds a reliable apprehension of things. So yeah, that sort of consideration or apprehension, I think he's rooting in justice. But I agree with you. I think the pushing back of the veils is this. You want to. I think last week I mentioned it was something along the lines of, I think they're pushing it back either because that's what people do in religious processions, or because they're about to have revealed to them, like what's an apocalypse? Is like a pulling back of the veil or something, or a revelation now. So it's a revelation in the sense they're pulling back the veil and they'll see it. But again, this is all interpretive. And then interesting here as well is the goddess is never named in the poem. But if obviously I'm not reading the original text here, I'm reading an English translation of it. But he says, and the approach to much avenging justice, and she, after welcoming him, promises to teach him two things. I'm not sure if this is a correct reading or translation, but it looks to me like Sextus is interpreting justice as being the goddess who provides the revelation. I do know there's multiple different theories on who the goddess could be. Maybe this is the origin of the theory that it's justice. I don't take that position, or I don't have much to say about that, but that seems to be one of the theories on the goddess's identity, if people want to look down that avenue. Now, that's all to say that my original plan was just to lead us into the next fragments by reading the last lines of the proem, but I fear I've gone almost on a tangent and made a space about the proem again. But you can see there's another interpretation of the proem from Sextus. But essentially, we've reached the goddess, and now she's welcomed us, and she's told us the two things she's going to tell us. And so we can start fragment 2, which is up at the top there. And she basically leads right into the speech that we saw end with the proem. So you could essentially read them back to back. It works well. She says, "Come, and I shall tell you, and do you listen, and convey the story." Just like last time, I'm going to stop when I see things that interest me personally. I want to stop here because she says convey the story. That's going to tie into a point that gets made, or that I would make, about the reason for the way of seeming. I remember last week we were discussing how in Plato's Republic, of course, when the cave dweller or troglodyte leaves the cave, and again, I'm not the Plato scholar or any scholar of any of this actually, but he gets out there and he sees the truth or the light or the form of the good or whatnot, and he's concerned about how he's going to come back and be treated by the people who never left the cave. He'll seem strange or stupid or ridiculous when he goes back in there and tries to communicate to the people that have never seen the light outside. And so I said, isn't it interesting that with the goddess, the youth or Parmenides is brought up to this place where night and day meets. He goes beyond the gate, so he's beyond that dichotomy, or he's beyond these opposites, and he's in this special dimension or realm of beyond, and he receives the truth, just like the person who leaves a cave sees something about the truth or reality that the others haven't seen. And then the goddess, at the end of the way of truth, as we'll see later, she tells him, I'm going to tell you about the way of seeming as well, the opinions of mortals, so that when you go back and talk with them, they're not going to run rings around you. They're not going to humiliate you or find you ridiculous. You're going to be able to communicate with them, and they're not going to outrun you. And we know from the end of the proem, right, that what does she say right at the end of the proem there? Again, I have the book in my hands, but it's in the thread of tweets as well. She says, and the beliefs of mortals in which there is no true trust. So she's already said at the end of the proem, I'm telling you the truth, and I'm telling you the opinions of the truth. And on the first line of the way of truth that we have, come, I shall tell you, and do you listen and convey the story. So not only is she telling you the truth and the opinions of man, but she's explicitly saying at the start here that you're going to listen, pay attention, because you're going back there and you're going to convey the story. So from the start, she has the intention of sending Parmenides back into the mortal realm to tell people. This is not a forgettable and private revelation in a dream that can't be shared. You do see there's some alternative translations down there. You got pay attention to the account when you have heard it, and listen and lay my word to heart. The text also in that screenshot sends you back to the introduction. The introduction says that the goddess is saying, convey the story. But then references some books by Moralatos, I think that's how you pronounce his name, but without really explaining it. But essentially I'm highlighting the convey the story because I want to just point out that right at the beginning of the Aletheia, or the truth, or the way of truth, the goddess is saying, you got to remember this because you're going to convey it to others when you go back. Presumably when you go back, he's going to have to convey it and remember it for some purpose. So there we get said. Okay, so do you listen and convey the story? What roots of inquiry alone there are for thinking? The one, that it is, and that it cannot not be, is the path of persuasion, for it attends upon truth. The other, that it is not, and that it needs must not be, that I point out to you to be a path wholly unlearnable, for you could not know what is not, for that is not feasible, nor could you point it out. I can't really overstate how much people discuss this dichotomy of that it is and that it is not, and what to make of these paths and how to understand this. There are many different interpretations. I mentioned a few last week, so I'm going to give mine in a second, but there are a couple of things that, like I said, I read this before I started the space, obviously, and I've read it many times in the past as well. I didn't write out an essay or take any notes or anything for it, but there was a thought that occurred to me and I did a little research on. And I see we have Ancient here who's great at Greek, but I'm not going to force myself upon him and ask him to confirm what I'm saying. I did my own research. I may well be wrong, and I'm sure Ancient, if he wants a mic to correct me, he's very welcome to do so, but I don't want to sort of abdicate my responsibility to someone else. Again, I warn people that there are multiple interpretations for all of this, and also some of what I do is a reach. Like last week when I said, isn't it interesting that it's Justice at the gate of night and day who lets him through, and it's Justice in Anaximander who is at that space of where the apeiron gives birth to things into reality, and then swallows them back up in exchange, or in payment for that injustice of being born. Isn't it interesting that it's that language of justice and reparations in both these, and justice is at that kind of space between the beyond and the changing reality, or the mundane reality. But anyway, look at this. We have the one, that it is, and that it cannot not be. Okay, so that's one of the routes or routes of inquiry that we can think about. Like, if we're going to start our project of, well, what can we think about, what can we say? Here's one path. We're going to talk about or think about that it is, and that it cannot not be, the things that are. And she says that this is the path of persuasion, for it attends upon truth. Now, let's go back to the very end of the proem. And what did she say? She said, it is right that you should learn all things, both the steadfast heart of persuasive truth. So we got persuasive truth there. And how is she describing path number one, or the first option? It's the path of persuasion, or pathos, and that it attends upon truth, alethei. Well, that's a grammar, but yeah, it attends upon truth. So we've got persuasion and truth being describing the first path, that it is and that it cannot not be. And then we've got in the proem where she said what she's going to tell him. Remember, she's going to tell him two things. First, the steadfast heart of persuasive truth. Using, now there's two manuscripts, or two authors who quote the proem, and apparently they have some different spelling or different words for that steadfast heart of persuasive truth. So I don't want to say that specifically the word persuasive. It looks like Simplicius did not give the word persuasive. He gave something that looks to me like circular, but I don't have an English translation of it here. But it looks like circular truth. But but at any rate, just looking at the translation, I think that we can tie this first path of that it is and that it cannot not be to that promise about telling us the steadfast heart of persuasive truth, because persuasive and truth seem to be repeated here, and ultimately, of course, this sort of affirmative path of things that exist is the path that the goddess is going to say is true and right and good, and really is the knowledge that she's going to be sharing. But there's also another thing here that I found interesting about the Greek. It said in the proem, the steadfast heart of persuasive truth. If we, Athenian has been reading Thucydides and writing about Thucydides, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a class of people in Sparta who are called tremblers or cowards, right? The Greek word is different from, it's tresantes, and for steadfast heart here we have a tremes. So tremes is going to be like a trembling or afraid, and tresantes, as far as I can tell, is also like to be afraid or to be a coward or to tremble, and they have the same etymological root from my research to some sort of Proto-Hellenic point about trembling. And the reason I bring this out is I just find it interesting that the path that it is being described as a tremes or steadfast. We can say, of course it is, because ultimately Parmenides or the goddess is going to say that the truth is unchanging. It doesn't become anything else. It's set in stone, kind of. So it doesn't tremble, it doesn't shift, it doesn't move. But also I think there's something about, there's that popular saying that like even a child will be brave enough to tell the truth to 1,000 people telling me he's wrong if what he's saying he really believes, he really thinks it's the truth. There's a certain confidence or strength that comes from believing that what you say is the truth. And there's also a certain terror that comes with knowing that what you say is uncertain, or you've stepped beyond what you can really prove up. That even if a child calls you out on it, you'll be a little concerned, like, sometimes we talk about credentialism, and I think sometimes credentialism, like when you say, oh, you don't know it, I know it because I have this degree or this knowledge of this thing, and I'm not going to explain it to you, go away. Sometimes I think that sort of attitude might come from the fact that it's difficult to prove up what we say. And therefore, just like I was saying, like, you don't really know it's 100% the truth, and you can prove it up beyond any doubt. And therefore, you could tremble or be worried about it in some sense. And I think I'm reading too much into this, obviously, but that steadfast word there has the same etymological root, from my research, as far as I can tell, as the root of what the Spartans would call people who fled in battle or disobeyed orders and showed cowardice. And so it's not that. Obviously, there's the A there, so it's not that. It's the opposite. But I read into that line something that I believe about the way of truth, which is that it's absolutely certain, and you don't have to be worried about it being overthrown or cowardly about stating it or have any concerns about it. It's absolutely true. It cannot be doubted. There just is this one true way that it is, and that it cannot not be. And yes, it's steadfast heart in the sense that it doesn't tremble or change into something else or shift. But it's also a tremes, which is a Greek word there, for not shifting or moving or just being still. But it's also that in the sense of that sense of not being cowardly or not having to hide from something or to be uncertain or to tremble. It's not like that. So I'm not one for etymological readings of things and trying to say like the true meaning of this word is that, and therefore we read that into the text. But I just I saw that word steadfast. I was like, the word steadfast is not repeated in this line on the way of truth. Let me look at that a little closer. And then when I read the tremes or whatever and did some research, I was like, this just sounds like the Spartan thing for cowards, and it's not cowardly. And so, I think that if we're allowed to make that connection to that etymological root, then there's something about the path of truth that is not just not shifting or not trembling, but it's not cowardly and it's not afraid. It's absolutely true, which is obviously, I believe it's absolutely true. So I like that interpretation. So there you go. It's an interesting bit of Spartan history as well there. I'm a big fan of Spartan history. And I would, if anyone is writing or reading about Thucydides, I wouldn't mind a discussion of the class system in Sparta, and especially for the tresantes or the tremblers or the cowards, because I think there's an interesting point in Thucydides' work. We all know the Spartans who surrendered at Sphacteria. I don't think they were ever considered tresantes or cowards, and it's kind of interesting because they sent a letter home to the Spartan government and said, "Hey, we're trapped on this island. Do we have permission to surrender, please?" And I think the government just said, just do whatever you want, but don't do anything dishonorable. And so it kind of gave them permission to do something rational or sane rather than just commit suicide. So I know they got in trouble when they got home, but I don't think they were considered cowards. And this is a huge tangent from the text, but I just thought steadfast there is always being interpreted as like a still or not shifting. But I think also you can read it, if you wanted to, in a way of saying that the path of persuasion is also a path of confidence and not being afraid or not being cowardly. Because this really is the epistemological, I guess, foundation or just like the absolute confidence that you can know that this is the truth without any doubt. And I tried to defend that opinion etymologically. But if someone requests a mic and speaks Greek, they can maybe refute me completely on that. But there we go. So there's the one way that we can inquire, which is the path of persuasion, for it attends upon truth, that it is. And then what's the other path? The other, that it is not, and that it needs must not be. So if we're going to do our inquiries, our philosophical inquiries, and remember when Sextus Empiricus was interpreting the proem, what did he say? He said that the much speaking route of the goddess, or root of the goddess, that's the philosophical inquiry, and all the philosophers chatting, I guess. So we're on that route, the goddess's route, and it's a route of inquiry or philosophical inquiry. And we can either discuss what is, or we can discuss that it is not and that it needs must not be. And the goddess says, that I point out to you to be a path wholly unlearnable. You can't know what is not. It's not feasible. You can't even point to it. And there's so much disagreement on how to interpret what all this means. One question is, what is it? Like, what is being referenced here? Because look, the one path, that it is, and that it cannot not be. The other, that it is not, and that it needs must not be. And you see that the it is put in brackets there. It's being inserted. And I think we've already mentioned that attempts to translate or understand Parmenides or the goddess's words are very difficult. I'm not a Greek speaker, obviously, but apparently it's a real challenge to pass out what is being said and how the grammar shakes out. And so there's a big debate about what it is supposed to be here. Last week, obviously, I gave a few different theories on what people say is being discussed. I will just add that, yes, we gave a theory, for example, that the it is supposed to be the, the criteria or something that is real. Like, what does it mean for something to be real? And then we can discuss what the thing to be real is and what the thing to be real is not. I don't take that path. There's people who will be logicians, and they'll say, look, Parmenides is revolutionary in logic, and he's putting forward this binary logic where you have true and false here, and the is true and the false is false, and he's putting forward this system of logic or something. Again, I don't pretend to know all about that or read it this way. My reading of it is, what is it talking about? Well, the it is an existential it. It's the all of existence. Because what are we inquiring about? The roots of inquiry alone are there for thinking, or there are for thinking. So what are we inquiring about? We're inquiring about the nature of reality, or what is. And so if we're inquiring about what is, just writ large, like reality writ large, or whatever is affirmative, then the it in the square brackets has to be this sort of broad metaphysical it, or all of what is. And so the first route makes perfect sense, If we're going to describe what is, like if we're going to describe reality or all of existence, we're going to say that it is and that it cannot not be. Okay, we're describing it in affirmative terms. We're inquiring about what it is. And yes, that attends upon truth and is persuasive because you're pointing out affirmative content. And it will make sense, and whatever sense it makes is going to be true because it is what it is, right? But the other path, that it is not and that it needs must not be, how are we going to talk about the whole of existence or what is in terms of what it is not? It's not going to make sense. It's just going to break down into nothing. That's why she's saying it's a path wholly unlearnable, for you could not know what is not. Because if we say, all right, the whole of existence is this thing we're discussing, and we're going to say what it is, and now we're going to say what it is not. Well, how are we going to define not there? And it's going to be a long discussion of it, but my immediate reaction is, if I'm saying, the world is not blue, I'm positing something called blue, and the word blue has some sort of affirmative meaning. And so by definition, that's actually over in the is category. That is part of reality. That's over here on what it is. I can't really point to, like she says here in the bottom line, nor could you point it out. I can't point to an is not. You can't know a literal is not. It doesn't make any sense. And as we're going to see in the text, whatever we try to point to or identify as an is not or what is not, it is not going to be referenceable. And so our attempt to reference it is either going to have to be interpreted as actually a reference to the first path, and we were just confused because it's affirmative content, so it is, or it's just going to be incoherent gibberish. It's not going to be a coherent string of words. So you see why I'm ultimately going to conclude that there is only one route of inquiry. So the goddess is saying there's two, the one that it is, the other that it is not. But I'm saying, and I think the goddess says later, and we can discuss that, but I'm saying there's only one path here, the one that it is. And the other, the goddess is going to explicitly say, no, it's not really a path at all. And so it becomes a question of, why would that second path be mentioned at all? And other interpretations will go on a different path. They will try to say, if you take a broad existential understanding of the term it here, and then you try to interpret that it is not in some literal sense of positing an is not that is beyond the is, you're just reading an error into Parmenides, or that's stupid and it makes no sense, they don't like it. You'll find that actually in interpreting, I think maybe it's an inherent part of interpretation that you identify possible interpretations and then rule them out as not being sensible or being incoherent or contradictory. And so they'll just say that what I'm saying, that there's this existential it, is just nonsense and doesn't make sense. But they will try to have some other understanding of this dichotomy here. But for me, I'm telling you that there's only one path, and the other path is just incoherent. And I believe the reason the goddess is saying two initially is because what has she just done? She's just welcomed the youth, and she said, "Come, I shall tell you, and do you listen and convey the story? What roots of inquiry alone there are for thinking." So this is the very beginning of the story. She's talking to someone who does not yet know. And what do people who don't yet know go around saying? They say like, oh, this is an apple. It's not blue. It is and it is not. They mix them, which is what she says when she talks about the beliefs of mortals in which there are no true trusts. So she's saying that there's two paths because she's going to start that way of speaking and then show it to be ridiculous. So she knows there's only one path, that it is. She posits a second path because of her interlocutor, who is a mortal, who has the beliefs of mortals, who thinks that there both is and is not, because he's confused. So she's like, all right, I'll adopt your language. Here's the other path. And then she says immediately, that path is wholly unlearnable. You can't know what is not. It's not feasible. You can't point it out. And for the rest of the poem, she's just going to basically rip that path to shreds and say it's no real path and get rid of it. So in my reading, of course, I think right off the bat, she introduced it because she's speaking to a mortal who has mortal beliefs in which there are no true trust. And she immediately, after saying it, says, path 2 is illegitimate. It's not really a path at all. You can't touch it. You can't point to it. You can't even mention it. She's essentially saying, when you say like you can't point it out, well, how did she say it? She's essentially saying that what I said is gibberish. So she completely eviscerates that second path right off the bat, and she does it several more times through the text. And so one way that I've seen people construct this in terms of logic, I guess like a logical statement of what she has said here, or a syllogism, or how things flow. Some people say that this is the wrong way to think about it, and even though it can be interpreted this way, it's just incoherent and just a wrong way to think about Parmenides. I think it's the right way, but the goddess is essentially saying, 1, there is isness. 2, there is not isness. 3, not isness is incoherent gibberish. Therefore, there is just isness. There's just the one option, no alternative. So it's like, point A, is or is not. B, there is no is not. C, therefore is. That's essentially how I'm reading that. And you'll see that in secondary source material, that reading of it. It's also the reading of another fragment we'll reach. But just be aware, there are plenty of professors who then say that argument results in a conclusion I don't like, therefore it's not the right argument, or I'm going to take an alternative interpretation. And, good on them for coming up with an alternative interpretation. Obviously, I can't prove that my interpretation is the correct one beyond all doubt, but just be aware that what I'm saying, that is or is not as illegitimate, therefore is a recognized way of reading this, but is also rejected by a good number of academics or secondary source material. Some do accept it, though. One way they also attack it is, some of them will say that the argument itself is, like that structure of the argument there, they'll say it's not sound. So they'll say this, they'll say, point 1, is or is not. Point 2, is not legitimate. 3, therefore is, because that's the only one that remains, right? They'll say there's not enough reason to deny or to call illegitimate the path of is not. And what they'll do is they'll sometimes say something like, I can think of many things that are not, like unicorns and manticores and things. Then they don't exist, but I can still think of them and I can still inquire about that path. Sometimes you'll encounter that. I would just say that just begs the question of what is it referring to? Is it referring to all affirmative meaning, existence writ large, all positive meaning? In which case the unicorn and the manticore are an is, not an is not, and they've just simply redefined is not to mean things that are not materially constituted at a given time in their physical system. So it kind of begs the question. I think the argument itself is sound. It's like is or is not's illegitimate. I agree, is not is illegitimate. Therefore, there just is. So that's ultimately my reading of fragment 2. But I picked out a few things there that are really interesting to me. And again, if anyone has any comments or anything, feel free to request the mic. But we know from this that the goddess is telling the guy, listen, you're going to have to convey the story. And then she's saying, as we followed that argument, is or is not's illegitimate, there just is. So we go to fragment 3 here. We have fragment 3 is a really short one. It says, because the same thing is here, because the same thing is there for thinking and for being. Let's go to the fragment context before I get into this. So in hearing that, that's a very famous fragment, and there's a very similar fragment that's going to come up later. That says, I don't want to say the same thing, but very, very close. But I think that this is going to illustrate a few things if we go into the context. So remember, I mentioned last week that we had a few different interpretations, and one was... Oh, Rogerio, I see your hand up. Feel free to talk.
Yeah, regarding this fragment, this shorter fragment, it seems that, at least it's what comes to me, is the same thing is there for thinking and for being. What it means is you will perceive things with your inner sense of your mind the same way, whether you are actually getting them from sensory input or if you're imagining them. You are getting them either the same way if you are an empiricist like Hume, or if you are a creative like Tolkien. You will see the things within your mind the same way. That's at least what I'm interpreting.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it. It's a different angle than I usually think about it, but yeah, I suppose whether you're the sort like a Sextus is the sort of skeptic, and or like a Gorgias or a Protagoras talking about the sense perceptions, or some modern scientist talking about everything being from sense perceptions, and whether you have like a Tolkien or some creative person who is imagining things, ultimately whatever they have is their mental impressions, right, or their experiences. Very idealistic or idealist interpretation. I'm not an expert on idealists, but that's one of the interpretations I do encounter, is that very idealist sense of ultimately everything is mental, because the same thing is there for thinking and for being. Some of the alternative translations we have here are the same thing can be thought and can exist. It is the same thing that can be thought and that can be. For the same thing can be thought as can be. Thinking and being are the same thing. And so if we had an interpretation of being in an existential or very broad metaphysical sense where everything is being, like reality is just this one big thing called being, and thinking and being are literally the same thing, if we read it that way, then yes, all of reality would be thought, right? There is that, I want to call it idealism or idealist reading of it. I've encountered that before, and yeah, whether you assign things to sense perception or you assign them to something else, ultimately it's your mental experience, right? That's what we are, a mental experience. Although that kind of, I think it begs some questions, but yeah, I've seen that interpretation of it. Last week I mentioned in Simplicius we had a reading of Parmenides as a dualist, where you had a realm of absolute truth or being, and then you had a realm of shadows or change or a material world, right? So it's like a two-stage universe or reality. One stage being this unchanging being or truth, and then the other stage being where we dwell in illusion or change or shadows or whatnot. In the context for this fragment, this fragment is given by Clement, but also is given by Plotinus in Aeneid 5, it looks like, and or letter 5 of the Aeneads or whatever it is. I'm not a big Plotinus person, I wouldn't know, but he writes, here we go, Parmenides too fastened earlier upon this sort of view, inasmuch as he identified being with thought, and refused to place being in the sensible world, saying, for thinking and being are the same. So that quote there, it gets translated in this section as for thinking and being are the same. But you see Parmenides is, Plotinus is sort of interpreting Parmenides in a similar way to Simplicius, at least based on this small contextual quote from Aeneid 5, because he's saying Parmenides is refusing to place being in the sensible world. So just like Simplicius had that being in the realm of truth or unchanging truth or some other realm, and then he had the changing realm, here we have this section of Plotinus being translated as saying Parmenides, inasmuch as he identifies being with thought and refuses to place being in the sensible world. So for him, he's saying, yeah, for Parmenides, being is pure thought, and it's not in the sensible realm, which you can infer or interpret that as saying there is a sensible world. So that's why I'm calling it a dualist interpretation, because there's also this sensible world. So that's an interesting context there. I see Ancient has requested the mic. Please feel free to talk. Let's see, there we go. Approve. Feel free to talk, Ancient.
It seems clear that he is explaining being in terms of thinking, and saying being itself is something insensible, just as thought is. That's his reading. On the other hand, it seems to me that at least in a prima facie reading, it's the opposite. That what's meant to be communicated by Parmenides is that thinking is being assimilated to being. That is, that thinking is not some special carve-out that is apart from being, but that thinking is itself part of being, right? And this is a good reason, I think, to take this as a conclusion on B2, which you just read, that, it's necessary that is not, is just is not. And I think this is sort of a conclusion on that. And a couple of other things about that B2 which are relevant here. and I think relevant to this B3. So the word thinking is noein, and I think that's right. I think that's right. A good English capture of what the Greek is communicating. But it's also important to point out that in B2, that the word, I think it appears twice for show. I think most translators translate it as show because just like in English, the Greek word is ambiguous. And it can mean point out, literally, like something physical, but it can also mean, just as in English, I showed you Plato's truth a moment ago, Tweetophon, and in that sense, we mean show by words. And it has the same ambiguity in Greek. So when he says, or it's the goddess, right? I think she says, I show you, nor could you show it. That word frazo, it can mean show by means of words, or it can mean show you as in point to you in some more palpable way. So that's important, I think, in interpreting what thinking means, because I take it that this fragment, this short one, that thinking and being are the same thing, that this thinking refers to the speaking, the showing by speech, because what is speech other than indication of thinking?
Yeah, and what's interesting is just on the last thing you said there. Next, I said that there's another section of these fragments that's very, very similar to fragment 3. And I believe the word speaking is the one used in that. Yeah, it is. It's fragment 6. It's the first line of fragment 6. It's, again, my Greek is awful. He says legein, which I think is speaking right off the top of my head. But yeah, he says as fragment 6, the first sentence is, it must be that what is there for speaking and thinking of is. And also just for people who are listening along, you were saying fraso, or the I have it grammatically as phrasais, or the pointing. That's the last line there of fragment 2. So I'll read from one line back. It was talking about the second path. Remember, she said, for you could not know what is not, for that is not feasible. And here's the line that Ancient was referring to. Nor could you point it out. There you go. And then the other thing I would say, Ancient, before I give you another chance to speak if you want, was you essentially predicted my reading of the text, which kind of makes me happy, but also I wonder, I hope I didn't poison the well or pollute the waters in the sense of lead you to interpret fragment 3 this way in light of how I had been talking about fragment 2. But yes, I think that the meaning of fragment 3 is whatever you're thinking about, it's subsumed in being. It's necessarily part of what is. I'm not trying to say that there's like what Plotinus said, for example, that there's like this realm of being and pure thought, and then there's this realm of seeming or something, or the sensible world. But yes, I'm reading fragment 3 as saying, because the same thing is there for thinking and for being, essentially whatever you're thinking about, even thinking itself, it's part of being, or it's subsumed in being, or in what is, I think I might have said too much there, but Ancient, if you had anything else to add, feel free to do so. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Well, I know you disagree a lot with, say, Plato and Aristotle, but you shouldn't let it slip by that at least part of the influence, I think, of Parmenides on them is, for their part, what they are doing is recognizing at least some of the conclusion or some of the argument that Parmenides gives us, in that they'll grant that there's a sense in which all these things do have being. Like anything that Parmenides says has being, there's a sense in which they would agree that it does. The difference, I think, for both of them, though, for Plato and Aristotle, is that they would simply posit gradations of being. And there are things that are more substance than others. And this is where the real disagreement would begin, where there are categories or gradations of substance for Plato and Aristotle, whereas it's all one thing. But nevertheless, there is that commonality, that there's some, at a very broad level, there's an agreement that there is a suffusion of being through everything.
Yeah, you're right. I can be a little too hard on Plato and Aristotle at times. You're absolutely right that one of the major disagreements I have with them is at that point of, it's not the only reason, but is about the gradation of what is, whether things are more real than other things. But you know, I didn't just, I do have to admit, I was familiar with Plato before I was familiar with the pre-Socratic. So I didn't start with Parmenides and then Plato and Aristotle kind of showed up on the scene, and I was untouched by them and sort of immediately repulsed by them. I did learn a lot from Plato and Aristotle, and I knew them before I knew Parmenides. And obviously I'm not a great Platonist or Aristotelian. I don't read them that often, and I don't know them that well, but I did come to read them first. And Parmenides was someone I stumbled into later, and ultimately I did wind up disagreeing on things like on the gradation of what is, some things being more real and less real, and those sorts of things. But I've always found some value in Plato and Aristotle. And if I tell people don't read Plato, don't read Aristotle, or Aristotle's malicious against the Eleatics, you should still go read them. Don't just listen to me. Rogerio, you have your hand up. Please feel free to talk.
Yeah, thanks. This is kind of ironical because we are reading here about the path of truth, and it's just one path, and so it would be nice if it were a clear-cut interpretation of the text, but it's not. And I am clearly very, very influenced by some Indian philosophy, but the themes here are some of the same questions asked by those, which is what is the fundamental nature of reality, and is there any relationship between knowing the nature of ourselves, kind of like the nature of our mind and our thoughts? Is there any usefulness in knowing how we think? And if we do know, does it help us know about the universe at large, or being at large in any way? So there's the possibility that one interpretation is, as we've mentioned before, that we are just experiencing the entire universe, and the universe is very, very complex and frightening and whatnot, and we're only indirectly experiencing it through our minds. And if we are experiencing the material universe, we're always at least one remove, because it's intermediated by our senses and nervous system. And then whatever inner sense we have of our mind is doing the final production, so to say, after rejecting a lot of data, after filtering a lot. But the other interpretation could be that the universe is fundamentally consciousness or mind, and us being conscious entities, we have kind of like a divine spark, so a quote-unquote divine spark of the bigger thing. We share some properties with the bigger thing, and thus our thoughts kind of manifest reality as well in their own way, in their own right. and thus it could be a possible interpretation of why the text seems to say that it is the same thing to experience things in thoughts or in actual physical reality, so to say. Okay, and Rent.
Yeah, no, that kind of goes back to when you had first had the microphone when we read fragment 3. The what I will say is I unfortunately cannot promise that what I say is useful or that the text is useful in any immediate practical sense. But I guess I can tell you something about thought if everything you think about has affirmative content and it's, it's subsumed or part of being. So at least it's telling us something about it. It's like if you're thinking about something, there's something there to think about. And you can't deny that it has some sort of ontological presence. You can't say it's a literal is not, because you're there pointing to it or thinking about it. And so it's part of being. So tough luck, I guess. And as we read through about the nature of being, if we come to learn that being is indestructible and unchanging and the like, then that's also going to have some sort of ramifications for how we think about our experiences or our thoughts, right? And again, not saying it's useful, but if someone wanted to come up to me and said, Tweetathon, I'm going to destroy you, or I'm going to, send you to eternal damnation or something, I would probably just say, no. I can't be destroyed, because being is indestructible and thinking or my experiences are part of being. So by extension, I'm indestructible. Is that useful? Well, if you didn't want to accept an argument about certain things, yes, but I don't know if it's or if you wanted to be confident about certain things, or you felt that you really loved something or liked something and you didn't want it to go away, well, it's right where you left it. It hasn't gone anywhere. Okay, hold on, you got your hand up. Feel free to talk.
And the historical context in which Parmenides and the Eleatics emerged was in the context of the Persian invasions to the Greek world. And probably there were a lot of people panicking and thinking, what we've built in our Hellenic policies, it is all for naught. Everything will be destroyed by the Persians. They will just raid and sack and just reduce everything to ashes. And then I imagine Parmenides comes along and he says, nope, you cannot destroy it, because in a part of being, all of this will always be there in the unit of being, or some
right.
some form or some not.
Right, right. Now I fear we might be going into fan fiction, but no, it's kind of tricky dating Parmenides. There's like different theories on when he was born. Some will say he's older than Heraclitus. Some will say no. Some will say he must have been alive to have the meeting with Socrates, and they'll push his birth date further forward. But even if he was, whether or not he lived through the Persian invasions, obviously he's over in Italy, and whether or not he viewed the revelation as a way to build confidence in light of an invasion. Certainly the Greek world was Ionia, the east, the west coast of Turkey, or the Eastern Hellenic world, was certainly in trouble with the Persians prior to the invasion. So yeah, so you're right. So for Parmenides' life, Persians would have been a big existential threat. We see it, some people try to connect Parmenides to Xenophanes. And Xenophanes of Colophon, he traveled the world and would have been in Italy at one point too. But he also spoke of the Persians and their influence. So, that was something on their mind, I suppose. But yeah, I think maybe you were telling a joke when it was Parmenides presented the poem as a way of not worrying about being conquered and being burnt to the ground. But it is kind of like that. And in a sense, he's right. Parmenides is still there, and we're still reading him today. He hasn't gone anywhere. He's wherever he was, and he's indestructible. And here we are today, still looking at him. But that's more my theological and metaphysical views, I guess. But we can go to fragment 4. And again, if anyone wants to chime in, always feel free to do so. Fragment 4. Oh, Ancient, you got a hand up. Let me let you speak. Feel free to speak, Ancient.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of other things. One is the use of "it's necessary." So he uses this a couple of times, and I think it's important to consider what that means, because most people, when they hear that, probably think, and this might even be the conventional reading of it, here I am, the goddess, presenting you two paths. So when I say it is necessary, what I'm actually telling you is, well, pick the right path, right? But but what she goes on to say here, especially in B2, makes it seem like it's actually not possible to pursue the other path, among other reasons, because, as she concludes, thinking and being are the same thing. So this "it is necessary" seems to be a metaphysical consequence that we just cannot do otherwise. And so it's not like there's a set, the only choice you have in the matter is to assent to what this truth is. And it's almost as if, I don't want to say a thought experiment, but it's as if contemplating this is the very proof. As soon as you think this thought, that is enough on its own to convince you.
Yeah, that's absolutely my reading of it. I hope I've been able to express that reading of it. Obviously, it's not an ad hoc space. I read the fragments before I loaded up the space, but yes, that's why I call it sort of the absolute. You know, when I was talking about the tremblers and it giving a certain confidence, what I was hoping to express as well is there's a certain sense in which this is absolutely, fearlessly, completely true upon realizing it. It just, all thought is, there's nothing other than that. The first path is necessary in the sense of metaphysical necessity. You can't think otherwise. And then, of course, I had to explain, like, why is there another path? Well, I can maintain my denial of the other path because, like you just pointed out, Ancient, the goddess immediately says, it's a wholly unlearnable. You can't know what is not. It's not feasible. You can't point to it. It's all just bleh. And she says that more throughout these fragments as we'll get to it. And so the only reason I can think of for that second path to be there is that, let's go back to that last part of the proem. What does she say? It is right that you should learn all things, the steadfast heart of persuasive truth. Okay, that's what we're saying, the absolutely necessary, unavoidable path one. And the beliefs of mortals. She's talking to a mortal. She has to send this mortal back to convey her words. She has to be able to communicate to this mortal. And this mortal is one who has the beliefs of mortals in which there is no true trust. And so he's the sort of person that says, oh, this is, that's not. And so she has to address the sort of person that would use the phrase is not. And that's what she does, because she's talking to such a mortal. But then immediately it's like, you can't point to it, just shut up, never say it again. And ultimately she's going to have to address how she's going to capture the genuine existence of the beliefs of mortals. That's going to have to be addressed. But yeah, that's I'm hoping I'm expressing it, but that's absolutely my reading, that there is necessarily absolutely only one path here. And the second path was only put forward in the sense that she's talking to a mortal with the beliefs of mortals, and he's the sort that will say is and is not, and so she entertains him with the word is not, but then is immediately shutting it down and saying, no, we're done. You can't even point to it. You can't speak of it. And she says this a couple of times in the text. And in the secondary source material, I'm not saying that nobody believes this reading of it, But there's plenty of secondary source material I read where they say, well, that interpretation's ridiculous and makes no sense, so let's try and figure out some other meaning to it. And maybe they do a good job, maybe they don't. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong. But Ancient, I hope I'm expressing that essentially I completely agree with you with the interpretation that one is absolutely necessary.
So you would say then that maybe there'd be a third option here, but which of these is closer to your position? That the two paths are actually one path, or that there's only one path and the other path is not actually, it just isn't?
The second one. I believe the other path is incoherent gibberish. It means nothing. The words string together but have no meaning. They don't point to anything. And so the challenge will be, how do we recover the genuine existence of the beliefs of mortals? But whatever that genuine existence is, it's on the one path. Number two is just a no-go.
Yeah. I think the immediate problem is, if that's the reading, then how is it we're able to speak about it, or the goddess is able to speak about it? Because then that would seem to suggest it's part of being, if speaking or if thinking and being are the same thing.
Yes, they would all be, as you said, part of being or subsumed by being or within the whole. So there's like two layers to this, right? It's like, is this a way of reading or interpreting the words? And then, is this a correct philosophical account of reality? So point two, I would like to think that for point one, is this a way of reading the text legitimately? I would like to think yes, because that's how I read it. But then point two is sort of an argument about, what is the meaning of reality, or what is reality? And then it could be a discussion of like, well, how can there be motion, or how can someone speak about something? And we can kind of get into whether or not we can preserve meaning, or preserve speech, or preserve motion given this metaphysical context. I think we can, because we still have to define what it is referring to. And I'm saying that it refers to all affirmative meaning. And so I don't have a problem saying that there are people speaking and people walking and doing all these things. Because I think whatever meaning or whatever you experience or sense or can detect or point to, that is being. That's what it is. It is all that stuff. It's like this grand totality of all possible meaning. So when you say, like, how can the goddess speak of it? Well, the goddess is part of being. This is being. It all is. It's all just affirmative content, unchanging and eternal. And so her speech of being is fine. It's just part of being. Just like thinking is part of being. And what is being? Being is this grand totality of all possible meaning. But that's sort of... I don't want to say that Parmenides or the goddess explicitly states that, because then I would, I think, be misleading people in terms of what the text explicitly states. But I am glad that I can at least be confident in my reading that there is a way of interpreting this as saying that path one is the only one. It's the one true necessary path. But if you have anything else, please feel free to add. I'm I'm actually very much appreciating all the comments you and Rogerio are giving.
If I may, I would try to sum it up by saying that what the two paths might be is that path one is a perfect idealistic ontology that actually matches how the fundamental underbelly of the universe works, or of being works, while the second one gets people to live their lives, their common day life. It's commonsensical, but it doesn't help them transcend their little simple mortal lives. It's kind of like a practical realism that gets people to go from home to work and do their stuff, do their day-to-day, but they will stay there. They will stay in this cycle.
Well,
So the first path is way more promising, has way more potential, but I think it takes time to communicate it. Thus, I think the goddess wanted the best for this youth and gave him also the instruction for the second path, so he could actually communicate with uninitiated people, so to speak.
well, it's a challenge, right? Because the challenge is, how is she going to capture... Where do we go back to? So that last line of the proem had to have genuine existence, permeating all things completely. So that's a challenge, right? It's like you have these mortal beliefs or way of going around the world and saying, oh, the sun is in the center of the universe, or our galaxy or whatever, and the earth rotates around it or whatnot. There has to be some genuine existence there. And so there is that challenge of... she's not saying it's not true at all, like there's nothingness to it. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. How do you capture that or preserve that genuine existence that is within those stories of the world or of reality? And Ancient, I think, raised a challenge that's not unheard of, which is like, well, how can she be talking about being if the words... I don't want to misrepresent Ancient, but there are good arguments or commonly raised arguments like that where it is a real challenge of preserving meaning. Like, how can you have a story of a goddess speaking if the speaking and the goddess and the chariot and everything all is the same thing, being? That argument is... I have encountered that argument a few times and argued it at length. It's like, if A equal being and B equal being, then A equal B. I don't want to misrepresent... Let's not assign that to Ancient. I'm just saying generally I've encountered that argument. And that's its own discussion as well. But yeah, that's the challenge. It's how do you preserve that genuine existence? And the genuine existence permeates all things completely because there is only one path, which is the genuine existence. So the beliefs of mortals have to be on there somehow. And to the extent that they're not on there, there's no belief. It's just an incoherent gibberish string of words. All right, Alejandro requested the mic. Let me approve you. There you go, Alejandro. Feel free to speak up.
Okay, are you ready for me?
Yes, please, go for it.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the space. Two to fun. Hang on, I'm on a walk. Let me let this car go by. Oh, okay. Yeah, so I thought of this a couple times before. The first time when that car was louder than the first. When Ancient was talking about the notion of gradations of being in Plato and Aristotle, and then I thought of it again listening to you guys just now, especially that last little bit you said about the if A equals being, B equals being, and so on. I'm not sure there's quite enough in this particular set of fragments we looked at tonight to answer the question, but it might be worth sticking into the discussion. Isn't the problem of particular things, or of the ontic? That is, how could you invoke the particularity of a thing without some dimension of the is not? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so I'm laughing because I wrote a long essay. I don't know if you've encountered it yet. You may wind up encountering it as you read through something I sent you. But an Ancient, you mentioned Plato and the importance and all the education they offer. This is actually true. If we read the Sophist, obviously there's an Eleatic philosopher or stranger who's talking. I don't like where that dialogue goes, but I do like the initial part of it, where he does give meaning to what you're talking about, Alejandro. How do we understand the term is not? And as far as I'm concerned, I'm not referring to the part of the text where it's a kind of a rambling discussion of the sophist, but there's another part of that text that I wrote. But essentially, how is not being defined? is it being literally defined? Like if I say that thing is not and put a full stop there, am I literally defining or identifying something as a not? That I think is completely illegitimate and gibberish and nonsense and can't be done. But an alternative is offered by Plato in the mouth of the Eleatic stranger or philosopher. I don't have the dialogue in front of me, but essentially, is not becomes an affirmation. It becomes defined as is other than. And so we can say something like an apple is other than an orange. And what have we done there? We have not posited any is not. Is not has just become a sort of a shorthand or a byword for other than. And so when we say that being is all meaning, or this sort of super complex amalgamation, or all subsuming, all possibility, all meaning, yes, we can say, just like if we analogize it to a painting or something, we can say, look, there's an apple, there is an orange, and the apple is an apple and the orange is an orange, and therefore the apple is other than the orange. But at no point have we negated anything in the sense that we fear. We haven't posited anything beyond being. We haven't posited any non-being. Everything we've done, it's affirmation all the way through. So to say that an apple is not, we don't put the full stop there. We have to say it's not something else. So the apple is not the orange. And what we've really said is there is an apple, there is an orange. They have their own existence. They are what they are. And that's the direction I go in responding to that general question of how do we understand the phrase is not? Because if we're going to say is not, that has to mean something. And then kind of how I try to keep everything in affirmation, because I believe the path one, the necessary path, is that pure affirmation. And as long as I'm always standing in affirmation, I feel like I'm on that path still. I've got two hands up, but Alejandro, I was just talking to you, so please respond, Alejandro, if you'd like.
Yeah, just briefly, I'm going to have to think a little bit more about that, whether the idea that one particular is not another is simply is reducible to other than. But let's set that aside for now. The other, I think, obvious concern about particular things is that they appear to cease to exist in a variety of ways. They appear to be destroyed. And so there needs to be an account of that, because it does seem that I can say, the whatever, the such and such, it got pulverized by a bomb, is not there anymore. It was there, and now it's not. So particulars also seem to more readily pose that problem. Yeah, let's see what you think about that.
Yeah, well, both... I think Melissus directly responds to this. Obviously, we're not reading Melissus today. But Melissus... Well, no, I won't talk about Melissus. Let's not do that. Essentially what I'll say is this. If someone's going to tell me that things are destroyed, the term destroyed has to have some meaning. So it's almost... I don't want to be like, oh, the burden's on you. But the person who wishes to indicate, I experienced something. And I experience stuff too, if someone drops a bomb on my car, it gets blown up. But I still need to describe or explain what that process was. And so when I say, well, my car is not there anymore. Okay, but where is there? Because if you're just saying the car is not here in front of me as I stand today, then, okay, that's true. But what does that say about the car yesterday? There's a lot of assumptions about, it's not bad to have assumptions. I have millions of assumptions, but it doesn't speak to the car yesterday. There has to be a broader model of how chronology or time works. And if someone drops a bomb on my car on October 13th, and my car is blown to pieces, it doesn't tell me anything about my car on October 12th. Or maybe it does in the model. But by definition, if I'm standing here on October 13th looking at my car, I'm not looking at the car on October 12th. Like, that's somewhere else. And I think that it's perfectly fine on October 12th. It's still there on October 12th. Just by definition, I'm not looking at that place. I'm looking here right now. And the car is kind of smeared across the entire timeline. So I would say there needs to be a discussion of what is meant by destroyed and what is meant by where it is. Like, it's not there anymore, which requires a larger model. And then, of course, the Eleatics, being heuristics, would love to get their hands on your model or someone else's model, because then they can pick it apart. And maybe that's avoiding the question, but Sophos love to.
I know Rogero wants to go, so I'll just maybe close with this for future, consideration. It seems like just in our exchange, we just got rid of the, I guess, usefulness of two fairly ordinary uses of if is not. And so the question is, it seems like maybe the important use of is not that is invoked there at the beginning is actually possibly a highly rarefied sense, and most of our ordinary senses of is not are supposed to be translatable back to other other expressions, right? And so for me the question here is to what degree are we not letting language speak, I guess is a way to put it, right? We're sort of using language to posit a metaphysics, but then whenever ordinary language goes in a different way, we just reshuffle the interpretation so that things fall back into place. And I wonder about operating that way.
Yeah, no, that it's fair. I just when we say we have to reshuffle, I view that reshuffling or that process of interpretation to be extremely legitimate, because what is that reshuffling doing, or what is that interpretation doing? It's trying to pull out what coheres in the sentence, like trying to make it coherent, and really examining it. And so, yes, I think it's fair to say that, in my viewpoint, every use of is not is either going to be saying is other than, or is resolvable to some other phrase. And, maybe we just have a natural or innate way of immediately grasping that other phrase or other way. But upon examination, we kind of make it explicit. And yes, we're shuffling around at that point because we're making it explicit. And many of us don't. I would say the vast majority of people do not think I am correct. And so when I examine and I give my interpretation of it, they're immediately going to be like, well, there's going to be some not confusion, but some wrangling. But Rogerio, please get your hand up. Please speak.
Yeah, it's basically in the follow-up of this discussion that to me is not could be a language or a symbol, semiology kind of thing, which is we are saying that a sign that we are trying to assign to something is not assignable to that. So like the word orange is not assignable to apple due to our conventions of language. And if we don't point out any orange, any onlookers might be confused and might think that anything could be possible to assign to that symbol, that word that is spelled orange. And so it's kind of like a no could mean a trillion or endless yeses in potential. In regards to this kind of correspondence, which is it's a very dear correspondence to us because we really like our symbols to have a neat correspondence with signified. And when it doesn't, communication breaks down. This is one of the levels in which is not can have some meaning in philosophical discussion. The other one is way more ontological, cosmological, which is if we attempt to speak about something that is not in the entirety of being, we will. It's a wild goose chase, basically. It's a fruitless endeavor. We will never ever be able to either think about something or point at something with our finger or draw something or etc., that we can say that it is outside of being. Not even supreme beings like God and whatnot could do such a feat. So just wanted to leave that out and tagging out.
Yeah, thank you. The before I move on, I'll just quickly restate the argument and my immediate reaction to it in very, it's an ancient argument. I don't know which text it appears in or who first raised it, but I definitely encountered this argument from Neoplatonists, on the internet. I meet an ancient Neoplatonist, but I know it must be in one of the texts of like Simplicius or Proclus or someone. They're definitely getting it from somewhere in there, because I encountered this argument years ago. But essentially, if an apple is being and an orange is being, then an apple is orange. A is being, B is being, then A equal B. Which, fair enough, that could be right. And then they say, then how is A different from B? Well, it can't be, they're identical, or there's something more to them than the fact that they're being. So it's like, okay, an apple is being, an orange is being, and then we want to posit something beyond being about them. So the apple is also something else, is kind of the route they go. And that's sort of an idea where they're using, remember, we have to discuss what we mean by the word being. And I'm getting too deep in the weeds now, I promise I was going to be short, but sometimes people will talk about what it means, the term being, what does it mean to be? And it's almost like it's a sort of an existential glue or some sort of existential status, like one more property. Like the apple exists and it's red and it's tasty. So exists or being is just another attribute. And therefore, yes, the apple can have being and the orange can have being, but they can still be different because there's something about them that's beyond being or beyond the fact of existence. That's like a whole different model. For me, as soon as someone goes down that road, I just say, look, there's just being as a whole. The apple is in being, the orange is in being. And when you want to look for what makes them different, then you just say, look, the apple is the way the apple is, and the orange is the way the orange is. And so their difference comes from their being, right? The difference is in their being, because the way that they are is as an apple or as an orange, which Alejandro may well formulate some strong objections to, but that's just my summary of where the argument often goes and how I usually wind up trying to avoid it, because ultimately I need to say that an apple is different than an orange, but I can't go outside being, and I definitely don't want to use being as a kind of an attribute of other things. Like, it's not an attribute. It is reality writ large, and it's an all subsuming sort of existential fact of all things, all possibility. But anyway, I talk too much. Wow, it's been it's been over an hour and a half, and we're on the second fragment of the day, and I think I posted 7 fragments. I was clearly too confident. We'll keep going though. I'll keep going. Let's go to fragment 4, because fragment 4 it's a longer fragment than fragment 3, but I have less to say about it. I think my views on fragment 3 are pretty clear, and the different ways it can be thought about have already been discussed. Fragment 4, I view fragment 4 as more of a lead-in to several other arguments that come later. And as you can see, it's the fragment itself is 4 lines, and obviously we can't know what immediately preceded or proceeded it. The source it comes from, going back to the fragment context, it comes from Clement in his Miscellanies, Book 5. And, I'm not even going to read it. He views it as Parmenides trying to discuss ideas about hope and justice and beauty. And without reading I don't think that this copy of Phoenix Pre-Socratics, in saying that this fragment came from Clement and here is the context, I don't think it gives me enough of a context to really understand what Clement's getting at. Again, no book is perfect. I think they should have quoted a longer section from Clement so I could get an idea of why Clement is quoting this and how he's interpreting it. Because I'm not even going to read it. I don't really understand what Clement's getting at here. Although this is kind of an off-the-cuff reading of it, so maybe I just need to read it again and think about it. But anyway, let's read fragment 4, just with the understanding that don't forget about this fragment, because I think this fragment is going to A, remind you of Zeno of Elea, and B, is going to be important for several other conclusions that are reached elsewhere. Look upon things which, though far off, are yet firmly present to the mind. For you shall not cut off what is, from holding fast to what is. For it neither disperses itself in every way, everywhere, in order, nor gathers itself together. That's the fragment there. There's a few, like I said, it goes into other arguments that are, or ramifications that will be reached later. But you shall not cut off what is from holding fast to what is. My immediate gut reaction to that is he's worried about questions of void and divisibility. So remember, what is supposed to be, at least in my interpretation, this grand metaphysical or existential absolute. It's like all of existence is. And so how can you cut off what is from what is? You'd have to divide them in some way. You'd have to stick something within them, like to separate them. Like if you draw two objects, or you place two objects side by side, their borders touch. But presumably they're still distinct. So there's something that separates them that's other than either one of them, I suppose. I think that's what's concerning him here. You shall not cut off what is from holding fast to what is. Part of it is you can't cut things up because there's nothing to stick in between there. Like if you have like let's say reality is like a sphere, and you want to cut the sphere in half. Well, in cutting it in half, you need to separate the two halves. What is going to be in the middle of them? If you say, well, what is in the middle of them, well, then you haven't cut it. It's still complete. It's still a whole. And if you say, well, what is not is in there, well, now you're pointing to something that is not. So I think this goes into that last line of the proem as well. What did he say at the last line of the proem? The very last line, I believe. Permeating all things completely. If what is permeates all things completely, then you better not be telling me that you can cut off what is from holding fast to what is, because you're not going to be able to stick anything in there, because what is permeates all things completely. And so I think that goes into any discussion of void, because what is a void? It goes into discussions of Zeno about divisibility, how things can be. I mean, Zeno is not well preserved, honestly. And I don't want to say it's like an explicit connection there, but there's something wrong with the idea of division. Now, obviously, you have to be able to distinguish like an apple from an orange. There's some way of understanding the complexity of meaning or the breadth of meaning that I guess could be described as a distinguishing or a division. But there's something very wrong with division when you start to say that one thing is absolutely independent or separated from something else, like they don't touch. They must touch. Everything touches everything else, because it's all subsumed in being. And so that's how I interpret that line there, as raising that concern. Unfortunately, it's just a 4-line fragment that I don't know where it was supposed to go in the poem. I can see why they put it after 3, because what was 3? Because the same thing is there for thinking and for being, or whatever you're thinking of or thinking itself, it's part of being. And then fragment 4, how does it begin? Look upon things which, though far off, are yet firmly present to the mind. So it's like, okay, yes, it's talking about the mind, therefore thinking, I get it. To comment on that first line, I also see why the first line rolls into the second line. Okay, so the second line is what we were talking about. What is holds fast to what is. You can't drive a wedge between two things that exist in an existential sense, because there's no thing beyond being or a non-being or an is not that you could use as a wedge. And then when we use our mind to think about stuff, we immediately detect that everything is touching us. Like Pluto. If I want to think about Pluto, okay, there, I've thought about Pluto, the moon or the satellite or whatever it's called now. I want to think about my car that got blown up because I guess Alejandro doesn't like my car, he blew it up. It's right there, right on my mind. Nothing, there was no distance involved. It's all connected in an absolute immediate sense. Now, I still have to walk to my car, so it's not immediate in that sense, but I can see what he's getting at. Everything is firmly present and connected, and there's no second road or other thing that you can use to drive a wedge between what exists. What exists will always be a complete inviolate whole. There's I use this analogy somewhere. There's a line that often gets attributed to the guy who loves his circles. Why is his name escaping me? Archimedes, right? And the Archimedes said something along the lines of, I love levers because you can lift things up and move them. And if I had another planet, I could stand on another planet and I would use my little lever and I would move this planet. That's not a direct quote, but you get the point. He's like, if I can step outside of this planet, I could move this one using that other position as a leverage point. But I think one of the ideas inherent in Eleaticism and in Parmenides is there's no other planet for you to stand on. There's no way of shifting what is. There's nothing else you can take hold of. And you're not going to cut off what is from holding fast from what is. You're not going to shift it. You're not going to move it because there's nothing else to cut or wedge or to change it. And then he gets to this other line here. It says, for it neither disperses itself in every way, everywhere in order, nor gathers itself together. Ancient mentioned that. What did he have? I'm not going to quote Ancient because I don't remember the exact wording. But essentially, there's a disagreement I will have with Plato, and that I think any Parmenides and many others would have with Plato and Aristotle about gradation of being. And these last two lines here. Obviously, Parmenides is not saying, hello, Plato, you're wrong. But I read these two lines in light of what Ancient was saying about ideas of gradation, things being more real or less real than others. And I will tie it into the second sentence about cutting off what is from what is. So the two final lines, they read, for it neither disperses itself in every way, everywhere in order, nor gathers itself together. What would it mean for what is to disperse or to gather together? Well, I mean, it's not explicitly saying it would be less real or more real, but how can you have this process of dispersal or gathering together? Or let's use liquid, for example, like making a liquid, like if you, let's say we wanted to concentrate something. You got fruit juice and you want to concentrate it, so you light a fire under it, the water burns off, and you have more concentrated or gathered together fruit juice, and then or a syrup at some point. And then, and if you wanted to disperse it or dilute it, you'd pour water into it, right? And it would be more dispersed or weaker, or there'd be a gradation. And he's saying being's not like that. It can't disperse itself and become more rarefied, because, how can something become more rarefied if there is nothing to mix with it or no void? Because there's nothing to separate things out. Whatever separation, it all is. So there's no such thing as an existential separation or dilution or dispersal. Everything is absolutely real and to the same amount. It's like it's all real. There's no like, oh, this is only kind of real, or this is real in a weaker sense or a more diluted sense or a shadowy illusionary sense. It's like, no, whatever you've picked out is real, and is absolutely real, because there only is what there is, and there's no second substance with which to dilute it, or to concentrate it. You can't you're not going to remove anything from being, like an impurity from a being, and then make it more pure being. So that's a lot of words to say. I regard it in that way. This discussion of dispersal or gathering together as a discussion of concentration and dilution, and it relates to the idea of cutting off what is from holding fast to what is, because again, the reason you can't disperse or gather and you can't concentrate or dilute is because you don't have anything to wedge between one part of what is and another part of what is, and you don't have any water or a beyond being substance with which to corrupt or to dilute the fact of existing or being real. That's all I have to say on fragment 4. Actually, I view it as leading into something, but also making those important points I just mentioned about gradation, and that Ancient really pointed out earlier. And obviously the people who believe in gradation, they will no doubt have many things to say to me. Rogerio, please feel free to talk.
Yeah, just to comment on this fragment, it seems to me that in a nutshell, it could be summarized as being has this essential nature or essential attribute, which is unity, and whatever you do, you cannot disrupt the unity of being. It's unity, it's all pervading in being, and it's a timeless attribute. Thus, no process can disrupt it.
Well, yeah, that kind of goes with it, right? If it's not going to be able to be diluted, if it's not going to be able to be dispersed or concentrated or cut off from itself into little pieces that are truly separated existentially, then yeah, it's inviolate. And we see that in Parmenides here, and we're going to see that as well in Melissus, with his discussion of if being could be corrupted or changed even by a single hair in 10,000 years. In the fullness of time, destruction being possible, it will be completely destroyed. That's pretty close to what Melissus said. I don't have a translation in front of me, but that's pretty close. And he makes another analogy with like an iron ring rubbing it down and stuff. But yeah, I think you're right, Rogerio. It's also speaking to the inviolate, unified nature of being, and how permanent and eternal it is. So yeah, that's what I get from that. I still have some time. I'll keep going. So that was fragment 4. So fragment 2, 3, 4. Okay, we made through 3 fragments. Oh, Ancient's got his hand up. Let me put Ancient on. Go ahead.
Is the same kind of argument that people often employ with objections to there being a soul. That is, the objection to there being a soul, invisible, insensible soul, is that if there is a soul, then how does it affect a material body? There has to be some kind of mediation, and what kind of mediation can there be between what is insensible and what's sensible? And I think a similar kind of thought is going on here, which is that what can be the mediation point between what is and what is not? And the very fact that you think it shows that it is in a certain way. So you cannot, in this sense, think of something that is not. And another way to say this is whenever you think of something, there is, you take a simple case of like perception. What we think happens in perception is representation of the thing that's being represented, right? That's why we're able to have a perception of it. So when I see the apple on the table, in my mind, there is a thought of an apple, and that thought of the apple in some way faithfully reproduces that apple on the table. But if it's the case that with non-being, my mind, which is able to think of that which not is, then it's not faithfully reproducing the non-being, right? Because the non-being is not being, while my mind is being. He doesn't say that explicitly, but I think that kind of thought might be implied. It might be implied in there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and it ties it again closely to fragment 3. So I think I can definitely appreciate why they put 3 and 4 back to back there, and what you're saying there with it. It sucks so hard that we just don't have these fragments strung together in their full context as one long text. But yeah. All right. If anyone else has anything to say about fragment 4, feel free to put up your hand. I will continue going. Again, I put 7 fragments, and we just finished 2, 3, 4. So we got 3 of them down. The next one is, again, I don't have a lot to say. It's number 5, fragment 5. And I will say this, though. So, full disclosure, I am not a fan of modern philosophy books. This is not like the book review hour where I say why I don't like books. There's a book on Parmenides called the Parmenidean Ascent. And I only mention this because sometimes I see people say, hey, am I missing a chapter at the end of the book? I've seen this a couple of times now. And no, you're not. I haven't read the whole book. I put it down. We can say that it was my failing for putting it down. I just don't like it for my own reasons. If you want to read it, go ahead and read it. Parmenidean Ascent. I think the guy's name is Della Rocca, or I don't have it in front of me, but the essentially at the end of the book, he has. I skipped to the end just to peek around the book when I bought it. He has a chapter that it's the first few lines of the opening chapter, and then it just breaks off, and it looks like a printing error. But I immediately, I knew what he was doing. I don't know if he ever explains it in the book, but if you read that book and you don't know why he did it, or if there's a printing error, no, obviously he's making some sort of allusion to fragment 5 that may or may not be explained in the book. I didn't finish the book, so I don't know. But if we read fragment 5, I'll do it now, and you'll understand why the last chapter of the Parmenidean Ascent, and this is my guess, but I'm pretty certain I guessed right, is just a repeat of the first few sentences of his book. It says, and it is all one to me where I am to begin, for I shall return there again. So there you go. The goddess is saying, I assume the goddess is a speaker. I'll go to the context in a second, but it's the goddess basically saying, where am I to begin my account of reality or being or what is. It doesn't matter where I start, I'll return there again. And if I added my own words in, I would say, for it all is. I would also wonder if, and again, it's just 2 lines, and we'll go to the context soon. There's an idea that I don't think is explicitly stated anywhere in the text, but I wonder if you know one thing, because all things are connected, right? They all exist. If you know one thing really well, can you divine or kind of, if you know something that is possible, can you know all of possibility? Can you kind of extrapolate or expand out from inferences or necessity to the rest of existence? Because isn't that kind of what we do when we do metaphysics? It's sort of like, what do you know with absolute certainty? Well, I know what I'm immediately aware of, or my immediate sense perception or my awareness or whatever model we're putting forward. I'm going to be certain that I am, or that these experiences are, in some sense, have some affirmative content. Okay, well then when you examine that, what do? Well, you kind of draw necessary inferences and you expand out from there. as best you can. And so I wonder if fragment 5 is about that process of taking what you know and then examining it and following the threads of necessary inferences. Because I think philosophy is fundamentally, it involves following inferences. It's like if you want to say, oh, I ate an apple. Okay, well that assumes there's some process of eating, and then there's spatial objects and blah blah blah, and you can go out from there. So I wonder if that's also what the goddess is saying, although she could just be doing the simple, I'm going to tell you about what is. It doesn't matter where I begin, because I'm also going to end with what is. Alejandro, you got your hand up. Feel free to speak, please.
And also maybe the question raised as to the context in which I guess
Alejandro, I'm sorry for cutting you off. I can't make you out. You're roboting pretty badly.
Am I still roboting?
Oh, now you're good. I could barely make out any of it. Maybe others it was easier to hear, but I wasn't able to. If you could start again, though, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll speak. Yeah, not let me know. I wanted to just you said
oh man, sorry, I can't.
Still not audible. Not on my side as well.
Okay, it's fine. I'll check.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I couldn't make out any of it. But if you get on Wi-Fi or the connection cleans up, please put your hand up and let us know. I see you're in connecting mode, or well, I don't know. If you come back to that, that'd be great. I do like your comments on the text. I opened the page to the fragment contexts, and like I said with the section on Clement, where I wish I had more information, or maybe a little essay from the translator or author telling me what they really meant, or their presentation of the fragment. For fragment number 5 here, that where am I to begin? I'll return there. It doesn't give us anything. It just says Proclus, commentary on Parmenides. It is all one to me where I am to begin, for I shall return there again. There's nothing else. So after 8.25. So that basically tells me nothing about the presentation of this fragment. And maybe I'll open the commentary on Parmenides, and it's like he gives his comments, and then it's just like a standalone quote at the bottom, in which case, fair play. There was nothing to add. But the author should still give me a little note and explain that. Rogerio, please feel free to speak. And I don't have a copy of Proclus's commentary on Parmenides. It's not like I can crack open my copy. All right.
Perhaps this fragment here is mentioning the idea of eternal recurrence. So the unity of being is a kind of a monolith that spans all time and all timelines, and these timelines even go they loop basically. The cosmos as we see it, the physical material cosmos, comes and goes, has dawns and dusks in cycles as well, not just the days on Earth. This, of course, I'm drawing from Hindu cosmology as well. They speak about very, very big timelines, very, very, very big. And maybe it's something like this here, that the unity of being encompasses all, and where we start in one cycle, assuming the cycle is a thing, we will end where we started after the cycle comes around. So that's what I'm interpreting from this, but of course this is wild speculation.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment. The kind of like if we view time as cyclical, I guess maybe we have it out of context, so it's tough to say what what context this fragment would fall in, other than that it's part of the way of truth, or at least we think it is. I will say, if we go back to the proem, what was one of the... So, who preserved this? Proclus. Okay, so we go back to the proem. Because remember, there was a section in the proem where pathos, or pathos, or whatever, persuasion was not used. Oh, no. Okay. Well, I was going to say maybe... is Kyklios. I don't know if that means circular or not. But in one version, it's persuasive truth. And then in another version, it's EUKYKLEOS. I would have to go look at that. I don't know. But I was just thinking maybe that it's like a circular truth, in which case, if fragment 5 is about circularity, I guess maybe you'd want to look into that that version of the manuscript where Simplicius says that. But we have Ancient with his hand up, who does actually know. Although I don't want to say he has to know, I don't know, but he's far more knowledgeable than me on this, so let him speak.
Well, there's the much larger fragment, which we haven't got to, where he talks about being as a sphere, right?
Yes, absolutely right. He does get to the point where it's a sphere. Although, with a sphere... so, Rogerio... And my interpretation of what Rogerio was saying is that if we view time as cyclical, wherever we're at in a timeline, we'll get back to it. A sphere is, I guess it's sort of like a circle, but in my own mind, I guess I don't perceive a sphere as cyclical, like a snake swallowing its own tail or something.
It is in one particular circumstance, and that's when it's rotating, though.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know if there would be I think, maybe you can correct me, I don't remember if Parmenides comments on the stability of it. Is it described as not moving because it's just being and eternally stable?
Well, yeah, in the long fragment you're talking about, fragment 8, right? So it's going to be that long section from Simplicius that everyone loves. It's like, it's twice as long as what we have of the proem. And yeah, he's saying it's going to be like a whole, single-limbed, steadfast and complete being, or root of being, or truth. I'm just flicking through here to get to the section where it is. Where is it? Because it's a part where it's like held in chains or whatever, is it? Because, there is a lot about it. It can't change and can't move and can't shift, and it's held in chains of limit and whatnot.
Right. So there is a lot of talk.
Here we go. Yeah, here we go. I found it. Sorry to cut you off. I did find it. It's the English is going to be besides what is. Here we go. It was just this that fate did shackle, to be whole and changeless. Wherefore it has been named all things that mortals have established, trusting them to be true, to come to be and to perish, and to be and not to be, blah blah blah. Oh, hold on, here we go. Since then there is a furthest limit, it is completed, from every direction, like the bulk of a well-rounded sphere, everywhere from the centre, equally matched, for it must not be any larger or smaller here or there, for neither is there what is not, which could stop it from reaching its like, nor is there a way in which what is could be more here and less there. It's going in my mind back to fragment 4, and I view it as, like I was saying with fragment 4. I think fragment 4 relates heavily to some of these later sections, and I interpret the sphere not in the spherical sense that Rogerio is mentioning. Although, like I do actually see that you have a point there, but I've always thought of it in the in relationship to fragment 4.
Well. So that word well-rounded there, that's probably ukuklios as well.
So let's see here. Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. It is. Yep. You're right.
And the broader point, though, is that, one need not take it as time, but there is a lot of commentary on the shape of the circle, and maybe you want to include the sphere in that as well, and that the beginning is the end for a circle, because anywhere you start on the circle, you end there once you go around the periphery. I'll see if I could find out who said that, but that's from an ancient philosopher as well.
Yeah, there's. Yeah, I should look at that some more too myself. That's good. We have another hand up. We have Jimmy the Otter. Jimmy the Otter, please feel free to speak.
Much appreciated. I would like to add one major view here, and that is about the very notion of the circle circumference, you see. It is proven that the circle exists. Parmenides says it exists. There's a distinction of the changelessness of the duration of its existence. The argument here, though, is against necessarily the change, but also the question whether or not put forward against the time of existence of this change, you see. There is a logic inherent to this discourse, you see. Before and after, you see. We must focus on our willingness to amend not simply the hubris of having to control logic and time, but the temporality of it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, it kind of goes into what very, very similar point, although you make it in your own way and add to it, that Rogerio was relating it to time and in that sort of cyclical time sort of sense.
Can I connect this to Israel and Palestine now, though?
Pardon?
Can I connect this to Israel and Palestine?
No, please don't. I don't want to crash the thread down in flames. I'm not going to talk about Israel Palestine. It's not really something that takes up much of my time in terms of things I think about. I'm sure it's very sad or not. I don't know. I don't know about it. What do we have here? All right, section 5, fragment 5. That's I think that's all we had to say about it. You know, when I expressed my disappointment. Oh, let's see. Ancient has his hand up. Please feel free to speak again, Ancient.
Yeah, one final thing I wanted to say about B4, which is that I think he's saying this there. There's something interesting about when we think about something that we could say is false as opposed to true, or in the words of the poem maybe are captured by what is or what is not, and that is, there doesn't seem to be any kind of qualitative difference in the object of our thought when we think about something which is true as opposed to what is false. That is, there's no magic distinguishing qualitative experience that we have when we consider something that's false as opposed to something's true. It's just a thought in our head. We cannot, by merely thinking of it, know the truth, right? If I tell you a lie about some political figure right now that seems plausible, you might well believe it, and the reason you can believe it is simply because of this fact that there is no magical distinguishing marker by which you can tell something is as opposed to is not. And I think this is supposed to be, on the Parmenidean line of thinking, proof that, well, just everything is then. See, these two kinds of thoughts are on the equal playing field, and the reason is because they are both present to your mind, and the mind is. And so this is another evidence that what is not isn't. It's just whatever everything is.
Yeah, and where you were finishing up there, sort of where I'm at, which is that if something is possible, it's necessary and is. And so if you told me, like, oh, there's a man outside your door, tweetathon, and he's wearing a blue jacket, I think if it's possible for a man to be outside my door wearing a blue jacket, then somewhere in the timeline that is the case. And if it's possible for him not to be outside my door in a blue jacket, there's also a timeline or a situation where he's not outside my door in a blue jacket, and they're both true. Although the challenge becomes, there's a difference between you saying these things and me grasping the meaning, and them being in a different way, like a man being outside my door. It may be the case that it is logically coherent for a man It is logically coherent for jackets and to wear jackets, and it is logically coherent for a man in a jacket to be in a room. But that doesn't mean it's logically coherent for a man to wear a jacket in a room in a given scenario. And so we kind of distinguish between your claim that there's a person outside the door in a jacket and whether it's actually possible for a man to be there in a jacket. I'm fairly confident it is. I'm happy to say that they'd both be true. There is a man and there is not a man outside my door in a jacket. They both happen. And that's why I wind up in a kind of a weird multiverse sort of viewpoint where anything possible is necessary in the fullness of time. But I also want to distinguish between you putting forward a scenario and whether that scenario can be instantiated. Like saying to me, Tweetathon, there's a elephant that's flying through the air on bees' wings. And then I can picture that as a cartoon or a movie or something, but it would be logically incoherent. It would be a contradiction to say that there is an elephant with wings the size of a bee flapping around the world given the physical laws. It just would be contradictory. And therefore I could actually say that's false. Like it breaks down. There's a contradiction. It loses meaning beyond the visual, I guess, evoking that visual of a flying elephant with little wings. Beyond that, it breaks down into incoherence, and therefore I can actually reject it as a lie or as something untrue, because I can't sustain it in the broader model. It's just a contradiction. Jimmy, you have your hand up. Feel free to
Thank
speak.
you very much. Yes, I just want to talk about how Parmenides was really the first philosopher to reject the divine nature of creation. You see, I can't think of the one who did it before him. So you see, in the history of religion, he was the first atheist philosopher. And to bring this back to Israel-Palestine, can I bring it back to Israel-Palestine now?
You know what? Just say what you want to say about Israel-Palestine quickly. I don't.
You know, there was a deportation of the Jews by Ptolemy I. And the time Parmenides, his philosophy became so prominent in Alexandrian society once Alexander the Great actually conquered the Levant. There was a question of which philosophy to believe in at the time, monism or the ideas of rejection of the divinity, the creation of itself was creation. You didn't require divine creation, great creation. It tended towards a negative view of the Jewish voice of creation for the first time. You know, there was well-known literature about the wisdom of creation. And there had been very little written at the time of a Greek view of creation. In fact, he was really the first philosopher to tackle this. Around 490 BC is when this happened. And it is not coincidental that he started writing this. So you can see that Parmenides is really the first anti-Semitic philosopher in history making.
Yeah, well, I'll single out one thing you said there that interests me was the description of Parmenides as an atheist. Well, two things that interest me. So the first one is Parmenides tackles the question of creation. And I think that's a really important philosophical milestone here, because if we look at the pre-Socratics through the lens of Aristotle and others, who we sometimes are kind of forced to do so, you have some people that, like Hesiod and Homer and others, who have these sort of mythological accounts of how reality comes to be from chaos, like, you know, chaos gave birth to order, and etc., etc. These sort of accounts that involve creation, and that do pose certain philosophical problems. And yeah, Parmenides rejects ideas of that being is generated, or generation in general. And yeah, I think it's a fair point to say that Parmenides is a major milestone in the philosophy of discussing generation and destruction, and whether being originated from one of these mythological accounts, or that it always has been. That presumes that we're interpreting Parmenides in this sort of existential sense of it. Like, what are we talking about? Being? Well, being is all things, or all reality. But yeah, I think that's fair. And the other thing I would say is, you got your hand up, so I'll just finish my last point so you can quickly either refute or agree with me, I guess. But you said Parmenides is an atheist. I could see why someone who thinks, and not saying you think this, but if someone believes that inherent to the divine or to God is the act of creation, then obviously, fine, you can probably call Parmenides an atheist because he's not going to say that being was generated by something beyond being. So there's some sort of argument that could be made there. But it just seems unusual to call Parmenides an atheist in a very confident sense when I agree he's positing the gods as existing within this metaphysical context just like we exist there. But don't forget, he was taken to see a goddess. So there's some sort of superhuman or non-human powerful entity that's inherent in his account of this revelation, right? So even though if that goddess is within that same metaphysical context and being the metaphysical context is beyond God, just like it's beyond humans, fair enough, but I wouldn't just call him an atheist like we would call them today. I think it'd be a little...
Yeah, I just want to say I love Parmenides. I've always loved the statues of him. Like his beard. I don't know, there's something really cool about his vibe.
Alright.
The vibe that he has. Yeah, do I think he's an atheist? Maybe. Probably. I feel like, yeah, he definitely gives me atheist vibes, considering like his poems and stuff. I don't know, I always thought he...
Alright, that was a great comment from Leah. Just, if we do have people with mics, please raise your hand. Thank you, Leah, for weighing in on the atheism question. Jimmy, please, you have your hand up. I spoke a bit. Feel free to comment.
Yes, I would like to comment that there is a direct line of logic between Parmenides and Martin Heidegger. You see, there is a belief by the likes of Heidegger that there's a superficiality in this world if you believe in the divine. And Heidegger didn't want to demolish society to the extent that creation should begin with a political speech first. It does not require a divine argument for it. That man created this universe and that there is no moralism that is divine itself. You know, there is a presumption by the ancients, literally everyone but Parmenides, that moralism comes from some kind of godlike figure, correct? He went to, you said he went to a goddess, but the goddess did not go to him, correct? His ideas did not come from a dream. They did not come from being born of a god. They did not come from an image of a god and so forth. They were self-created, and his connection to something as a goddess means that his morals aren't his own. And this is what I think what led to the rise of Nazism. The idea of accepting of the destiny to undertake a mission for the struggle, glory, and spiritual rejuvenation. This is a Heideggerian interpretation of Parmenides, and thus a particular component of the brand of Nazism that I reject.
Okay, all right. So Jimmy the Otter is opposed to the Nazi Party. No, I appreciate your opposition to the Nazi Party. That's okay. I don't think there's anything explicitly in the text about Nazis, and sort of Heidegger and Germans and other things are sort of beyond the my limits of understanding the text. So I'll just move on.
But very quickly, would you confirm that what I said was at least slightly true? That there's a difference between the universality. There's a universal nature of morality. Please don't make fun of me, guys. There's a universal nature of morality that has existed since the ancients, transmitted to Kant. Correct?
Well, I don't know Kant or anything. So if you want someone to comment about the Germans, I don't even want to talk about the Germans. I don't understand them. I do go to some spaces and I listen and it's interesting, but I haven't read Kant or Heidegger in any sort of real sense. I haven't really spent much time with them. I guess
my question: do you not think there's a problem that Parmenides believes morality is self-created?
No, I don't. I don't believe Parmenides' text really addresses morality in any great sense. We'll go through it, and maybe there are parts in here that you'll pick out and say, "Well, that one's really talking about morality." But so far, what have we seen in this text so far about morality? Someone's requesting a mic. I will hold on. Let me, Nathaniel. There you go. What have we seen about morality so far? We've seen one section where it says it's right and justice that the youth will learn all things, the steadfast heart of persuasive truth and the belief of mortals. So I guess to the extent that it's saying right and justice to learn the nature of reality and the beliefs of mortals, that's kind of a moral thing, or saying it's the right thing or a good thing to learn this sort of stuff. But do I think that Parmenides goes into a long discussion of normative standards of morality and how to make ethical judgments, or where that could come from? I got to admit, I'm not the closest reader of texts, and it's been a while since I read through The Way of Seeming in great detail, but I doubt it. I don't think so. I don't think the Eleatics in general have much to say about political organization and moral standards and ethical application of those standards. There's kind of like biographies of people like Zeno and others who fight tyrants, but that's much later tradition, and I don't think you're going to derive moral teachings from whether or not Achilles can overtake another runner, or as we do it today, a tortoise. You can deny some theological teachings like eternal damnation or eternal salvation and stuff like that. You can deny theological teachings about the creation of the universe. That, I think you do have a point there, Jimmy. But I'm not going to land on, should an American eat 100 cheeseburgers? Well, Parmenides is not going to tell me that. I think I can give you an answer, but I don't think it's going to come from the Eleatics. I just don't think their texts are preserved well enough. And I don't think that was their primary mission, to give us a moral system. I don't think that's the goddess's reason either.
I just want to comment that I added my quote of what I'm quoting, if people are asking for my source, on the Jumbotron.
Good job, Jimmy.
Thank you.
So, let's see. Jimmy the Otter, in a lecture on Parmenides after the Russians defeated the German army, it's they are in agreement with the truth of being, if they're strong enough in their readiness. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I find Parmenides inspiring, and maybe soldiers in World War II did as well, and that's great. Obviously not great that they're killing each other and doing atrocities, but I mean, that they find Parmenides inspiring is always a nice thing. Rogerio, please feel free to talk. Leah, you've requested the mic. I'm sure you're a lovely person. I'm not giving it to you because you didn't put your hand up, and I'm about to close the space pretty soon. I'm running out of time, and like I said, I'm sure you're lovely and have something really good to say, but it's how it goes, right? Rogerio, then Nathaniel, and then I'll probably shut it down.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short, but go straight to the point. There is some agreement here between Parmenides, the Buddha, Cicero, and Descartes, according to what I've learned from these fellows, in that they espouse the same moral idea, that if you learn something, it is your moral duty to teach it to your fellow humans, if you learn something that is useful. And this is something that these four individuals have expressed in some form or another. And so it seems that it's counter to human nature to figure out something that's valuable, that constitutes knowledge, and hold on to it and keep it quiet and just let it go with you when you die, and so deprive humanity of learning from it. So it seems that people more than not will feel compelled or will feel that they have a duty to teach others what they've learned. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. I think that's I think we're of one mind on that one. I picked out the only bit of morality I saw yeah, I think it's right and justice that we get to teach others what we know, and the goddess is doing that. Nathaniel, please feel free to talk.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. So myself and Jimmy the Otter have begun a project several months ago, which has extended across several Twitter spaces like this, in which we have encouraged everyone, especially so-called white nationalists, to convert to Judaism. Because Judaism represents the most advanced, the most complex system of ethics which presently exists, and which probably ever will exist, given, the trajectory of ourselves as a species.
This has to be
I
a
would
bit...
just encourage everyone here to look into Chabad Lubavitch, into the kind of religious literature which they're offering to converts, and, consider being a righteous Noahide, because honestly, there's Judaism, and then there's everything else. And I thank you. I apologize for intruding on your discussion about the pre-Socratics, but honestly, the pre-Socratics pale in comparison to the Judaics. So, thank you very much. And Jimmy the Otter, thank you, my fellow co-ethnic. I deeply appreciate your being here, and I hope that we can continue to fight the good fight together, my friend. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to add, my source, I actually post on the top on the Jumbotron, the paper itself. So that's all I'll say. So if you're interested in learning more about Heidegger, Parmenides, the anti-Jewish philosophers, and its inspiration for the German war against the Soviet Union, just look on the top.
All right. I'm sure people who are interested in that will hop right on it. I had one last thing to... Holistic requested the mic, so I'll let Holistic speak. But I just wanted to add, I was complaining about the fragment context for that last fragment, about, returning to where one begins. But actually, if you look at the screenshot, it says in the note to look to page 19 of the introduction. And, I didn't read the introduction, but while you guys were talking, I went ahead and read it. And I've read it before, but it basically tells me I'm wrong on one of my interpretations. I don't know where I first encountered this or whether I came up with this interpretation myself, but the introduction says this. It says... And it is all one to me where I am to begin, for I shall return there again. If this mysterious remark characterizes her own procedure in the way of truth, it suggests that her starting point is a matter of indifference because her path is somehow a circular one. It has even been taken to mean that every attribute of reality can be derived from every other. So that's what I said, that you can derive the rest of reality from one point that you do know by following inferences or like. But then the introduction says this. This goes far beyond the available evidence. No such ordered pattern of circular reasoning has ever been traced, nor perhaps could it be, given the fragmentary state of the text. But the possibility that the original discourse contained in self-conscious circularity remains an intriguing, even if unprovable, speculation. Now, I read this introduction many years ago. Maybe that's where I got the idea from initially. I don't know. But basically, it sounds like my hope was a bridge too far. Can't be proven with what we have. Is the position of the introduction here. Holistic, I'll give you the last word if you have something to add. I know you requested the mic. I'm going to shut down the space. It's been it's been a while, and we did not get through all the fragments. We'll just have to pick it up again another day. But Holistic, feel free to talk.
Yeah. So I don't have like a huge question or anything. It's not really anything I really care about, to be honest. But I did hear Jimmy the Otter say, because I've heard people fight about circles before. I don't really understand it, but at least it's very clear to me that as long as we consider, obviously a circle and a perfect circle, they're the same thing. The definition of a circle is known. Was there some new math you like talking about them using in the past? Because I understand that no circle, depending on the size, it will get more exact. So I don't know. Will you quibble on that, or do you not care about the conversation?
Are you arguing that there's no perfect circle in nature? That even if we recreate it, there's no such thing as a circle itself? We just try to create the most thing that looks as much as the need, but never approach it.
Well, that's what I thought you might want to. Are you describing a circle as like something that looks kind of roundy to the human eye? Like, are you describing a circle as what a circle actually is?
Did you say kind of roundy?
No, Nathaniel, so Nathaniel, I don't know if you know the background of this. Basically, the
it's all
argument
over.
No, I'm
in the chat is interested. The argument presented here is that math exists in the universe. The counter argument is, if it exists, why doesn't it exist in the universe? Because like a circle, there's no such thing as an actual circle. It's simply a projection of what should exist. And this is kind of an issue with those who try to attest to the oneness of nature. It cannot be constructed without God's help because it cannot exist perfectly, correct? So I would say yes. My answer is yes.
All right, there you have the...
That's why I was asking Jimmy, because I did need to know what your definition was. You just sounded sort of passionate about the circle, so I thought you might have something interesting to say.
Well, there we go.
Well,
we have...
there is an issue in the philosophy of mathematics, whether or not it can exist, because it's never been proven to exist.
Well, this is all very good. We now have the an explanation of the Orthodox Jewish position from an otter. Yeah, I think I'll close the space out on that. If anyone does wish to convert to Jimmy's way of thinking, he does have a link up at the top there.
Please, it's our only chance. You must convert to Judaism.
But I'm
stress this enough.
But I would stress that creation is not possible, neither is destruction, and the Jewish account of the universe, or the Abrahamic one generally.
Like Martin Heidegger.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be called Heidegger now because you've related him to the Nazis, so it's all... I'm standing off from that. I'm strictly in the ancient world.
You have an affair with Hannah Arendt, so clearly we know which side his bread was buttered on. But go ahead, Tweedo, sorry.
All right, guys. I'm calling it a day. Have a nice day, everyone. It's been very nice chatting with you all. Bye.